great combination of experiences, from angel investing and previously being an exec in a corporate setting. Sarah, you've had a fantastic background, as one of the youngest general partners in venture capital at Greylock. And then Siobhan, you and I had met previously and talked about the things that you should look out for in executive recruiting. So, awesome. You guys don't mind starting with self-interest?
Hi everyone, I'm Siobhan Neilland, and I'm a little complex. I have about 4 organizations that I do. So I'm the CEO and founder of a nonprofit called OneMama. It helps impoverished women have babies safely. So most of what I'm wearing is made by this community in Africa, and that's what funds my birthing clinic and medical clinic. And the passion of having a voice for women and diverse women and diverse communities brought me to the United Nations, and that is where I have consultative status to give voice for women in these kind of communities, but also women in tech, because my day job, where I make money, is I work as a staffing consultant. I've had my own recruiting company for a long time, but now I exclusively work for AWS, which we were just talking about, yep. And I hire exclusively leaders and diverse leaders. And so I'll talk a little bit more about my experience of using my world outside of the work I do at Amazon and bring that voice to how to really move the needle with bringing diverse leaders and giving you some suggestions on how to do that.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Goa. I'm a partner at an early stage venture firm called Greylock Partners. We have offices in Menlo Park and San Francisco, and we do investing around the world, but very focused on technology businesses that serve businesses or consumers. I've been at Greylock for the last 6 years. And before that, I spent a brief year at Goldman Sachs and then started a company that didn't work out, but learned a lot from it, raised some seed money as a consumer thing, built a small team and a product, and then before that worked rather unconventionally for my parents' company, which is a public technology company called Casa Systems. They just did earnings today, still somewhat attached to it, and it's an enterprise networking company, actually serving the service provider market. So if you think of Comcast or AT&T or whoever you get your internet from, there's software on the back end and hardware on the back end that manages that traffic. So that's me, a little bit simpler. I'm pretty focused on my day job, but I'm excited to be here. Nancy works at one of our portfolio companies, Rubric, as an emerging leader, and so I try to advocate for business opportunities that are served by women and led by women in our portfolio.
Hey, I'm Dan, and I have spent a long time, probably too long, in Big Co land, where I was VP of M&A and strategy at Cisco, did an internal startup, and then have become an angel investor. One of the things I'm most proud about is the diversity of the portfolio. One of the companies I've invested in early is Arista Networks, which is run by the great Jay Sri Lal, where we have female CFO, female CEO, female head of the audit committee, and it's actually, quite frankly, wonderful. It's a different set of questions that come up. A lot of times we don't have to deal with this question of why aren't you diverse, right? We have other issues, which is good. And also, it's really interesting, and in a lot of the early stage companies, one of the great litmus tests is, we'll talk about this, but looking at the culture is far more important, and I'd much rather be in cultures where it's inclusive, right? Because I told you a lot, and what Tom had said about, companies die of suicide, not homicide. One of the core things that kills companies is cultures that aren't inclusive. So it's a great tell early as to whether you have the right team or not. And just to close, I've been part now of 25 billion of value creation since I started, and hopefully it's public now that Zoom is looking at an IPO, and so that's going to be another big win, and hopefully really good for the community as well. You could have.
Not me.
Not you. Not you.
Me on the point of the panel.
Not you. Was not you.
All right, great. Thank you so much, and apologies for being late. Hi, my name is Sharon. I will be moderating this panel. I work at Papa Meets Bagel, a dating app. Great. So, I'm here with bunch of great entrepreneurs, tech leaders, and VCs, and it's so important to have a lot of women and diversity in on this journey. Why is it so important to have this?
No, really, people always ask this question, but it comes down to money. Companies that have at least 3 directors or more make 66% more revenue. They have more percentage of a longer term growth. They tend to be better in the percentage, like 15 to 20% better than their competitors. Because it was kind of like some of the other panels earlier. If you don't know that Chinese goes backwards, or if you don't know a certain language does something, and you're building a product that is going to sell to that, you didn't have anybody diverse on your team, you're not going to know that. If half your market is to women, like your product, if you don't have any women on your team or leading those teams, then you're not going to be able to solve the market's problems, whatever your product or service is. That's the bottom line. I think recently I've been doing tons of research to find the actual numbers, and there's more and more research showing that it just makes more sense financially, which is why I think you're seeing more diversity as a push in companies, because now everybody's realizing you need to do it or you're not going to make it in the marketplace, and you'll just be another company that doesn't make it. That's my opinion.
One thing is that I'm very competitive. I want to win, right? Excluding 50% of the planet doesn't sound like a winning strategy, right? And so I think that the very strange idea that only if we hire people like us, it really works, is not really a great strategy. Now, I will also say at Cisco, I had a very set of frustrating experiences where when we looked at ourselves, we saw early on, I was there as employee number 800. And as we started to grow, we started to see a lot of strangeness in the hiring that we didn't like. But we'd have programs, we do this, we do that, we'd have diverse candidate pools, and then you put up the photo of who got the job, and it was someone who looked like me, okay? And I began to realize that if you want to win, you need a culture that is accepting of winning, right? And that starts from the beginning and from the top. And I think it matters deeply to me because I want to win.
We look at it pretty simply at Greylock, which is over time, we would like our investing team and our portfolio to reflect the world they're trying to serve, right? To know your users, right, across a whole bunch of different areas. And I'd say venture capital it's a laggard for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of them is structural, just that these partnerships turn over quite slowly. So I think one of the reasons that, besides my friend over here was saying, I like to win and it's a competitive industry and that's fun. One of the reasons I'm in venture is because it feels like such a position of leverage, right? You look at these companies and what a company is 10 years from now as a massive influencer of the world. So Facebook is a portfolio company. The culture and the leadership team at Facebook and the way it does business gets established quite early, right? And it may evolve over time and it may be imperfect the entire way, but I think I and my partners take that responsibility quite seriously because it's quite a bit harder to change your company such that you have a diverse leadership team or diverse engineering team when you're 10,000 people versus 5. If you look around, you're like, this doesn't look quite right. So I think that's one reason it's really important in the early stage ecosystem. And then I just think in terms of backing more diverse founders, this just seems like a really high leverage way for me to do it because I spend so much of my time executive recruiting, closing engineers or salespeople or whatever it is. But if I just back founders that are more diverse that I think are going to be successful, they're going to do that on their own, right? So for example, I'm invested in a company that's 2 female founders building a company called Clio that is focused on family support. This is, I would argue, a value prop that is interesting for both genders and really the business community overall. But like one interesting thing is like we have not attempted to like recruit lots of female people to Clio, but the company has no problem with this, right? And so I guess like I always think about leverage and limited time and your ability to influence the world. You know, with the time we have to devote to our professional careers, and I'm like, okay, the way I can make a difference is I can back female founders and more diverse founders, and they're going to go hire a bunch of more diverse teams. And if they're successful in the world, that's really going to have outsized impact.
That's great. I think having that goal of 50% male, women, equal diversity at a company is really, really great. However, a lot of companies still struggle with this. So for your portfolio companies and even in recruiting, are there specific things that your companies have done or tricks or tips that you've done to encourage more of this diversity when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, so I was actually part of the pilot program at Google when I was there a million years ago, where they had diversity recruiting, and they put more money and resources towards it, towards any other company first. You'd think their numbers would be better. And so what I feel like what we really realized is it's not the pipeline, it's not all the things that we thought it was. What we're all looking through is a lens that's more masculine, including me. As a recruiter, I'm taught to look for a trajectory that looks like this. They get here, then they get here, then they get here. Well, that's a very male trajectory. I only exclusively work for women and diverse, unrepresented minority leaders right now, and their careers are like this. They didn't get that promotion, so they go over here. They didn't get this, so they went to another career. One woman got 4 different degrees. She's legal, marketing, computer science degree, and she loves that she's extremely diverse, but nobody ever wants to interview her because she looks too and this is what most women do. We really like lots of diversity in our skill sets, and we think it makes us more marketable. But that's not the lens that recruiters and hiring managers are looking at it. And so I have this new role that I just sort of forced Amazon to give me and created, and it is just focusing on teaching candidates how to take this and teach you how to communicate your skill set into this. And so if you didn't get that leadership role, and you can get to manage managers, but here's what you did offer and how you changed and how much revenue you drove for that, or how much you changed this product. Make sure you're using that you were Chinese and you used this, or that you were, because you were the only woman on the team, you saved $1 billion for the company because it was now recognizing women in this particular way. So you add that zigzag and you add it to this and show how those skill sets will make you a different leader and a better leader. Now I have to also teach my hiring managers how to do the same thing and not look through that male lens that we've all been taught to look through. And I've only been doing this a few months, and we're having huge success. And I'm bringing in leaders that we would have never even addressed or looked at companies like Amazon. And I think the part that my secret ingredient is that as women, we all have this sort of maternal instinct most of the time. There's this emotional and social intelligence that we have, and we're not naming it. We give all this credit for technology and engineering, but what my strong skill is that I can intuitively read something and make it happen and make a decision, but we're not giving that weight in the interviewing process. So as candidates, if I teach my candidates how to give that some weight, give it just the same weight as you would your engineering degree, that's really changing the thing, and we are getting more and more women and unrepresented minorities through the pipeline, and I'm hoping that it will actually move the needle in a much bigger way if we all start to look at diversity hiring through this emotional, social intelligent lens. That's my opinion.
I guess a few simple things. I actually think it does make a pretty significant difference to just begin to ask the question at the board level of like the founders and CEOs we work with of, the team looks a certain way right now. Like, do we want it to look that way at 25 people and 100 people? And usually like the answer is no. It should be no. I think another natural point where we begin to think about this is when we add outside board directors. And so now in that conversation, and almost in every conversation by default at Greylock, it's like, do we have diverse candidates for this role? And so I think like those two trigger points of like the founding team is beyond like 3 people who used to be buddies. Like, do we want to keep growing it in a way that just looks like those 3 people? And then what do our first set of board members look like? So I think those are 2 triggers for just making sure we ask the question every time. And then, you know, I think that there are, like, this is a pretty controversial topic in terms of like whether or not you actually quota people on hiring pipeline. We have companies in the portfolio who do this. I'm personally in support of it because it seems to work. But I know people are pretty sensitive about it, and so just in case anybody's not aware of like how this works, is for any hiring manager, like you give them an expectation that's actually attached to like the rest of their sort of goals and performance of, if you were supposed to hire 10 engineers, and you know you need to look at 50 engineers to hire those 10 engineers, is some percent of them diverse candidates, and like this does move the needle in our companies when they apply this. Not everybody likes it.
So, culture is strategy for breakfast, and I want to see culture. One thing Jayshree told me once, she said, I said to her, you know, did you tell me about your journey as a woman? What journey as a woman? I was just better than everyone else, right? And, right, and what I worry about is not that, I worry about that there are women who are exceptional, who are being put in places because of culture, where they have to work twice as hard, go twice as far, right, in order, where I might have to go half as hard, right, because of some maleness I have, right, or someone feels like, oh yeah, I know you better, I can deal with you better, which, whatever. So I think we have to be honest and say there's something culturally wrong, and let me just say that I fully embarrassed myself. I was sitting at a Cisco thing where I was representing the African American population at Cisco. Problem number one. Problem number two, I opened my mouth and I said, we believe in diversity, and he rightly said to me, I don't care about diversity, open the door, and if the door is open, great things will happen, right? And I realized he was right. I realized I shouldn't be representing anybody else anymore. And finally, I've come to this conclusion that I don't love quotas, but I love belief, right? And I've seen it, like at Zoom, they realized early on that they were skewing not in a non-diverse manner, but the team there, not the founder, the team there said, this is not us. And they basically said, we're gonna change this. And now, in fact, the entire product management team is all women, because they're better than some of the other people that we interviewed. They were the 3 best people we found, and 3 PMs at Zoom, and they are fantastic. And so, you know, anyway, I think this is a cultural issue, and I think we have to be honest as Silicon Valley that we have not come as far in culture as we like to think sometimes.
Yeah, great. So Sarah, you bring up a really good point on quotas, and you know, I think California recently passed a law in 2019 that will enforce all publicly traded companies in California to have at least 1 woman on the board. What do you guys think about this?
Let me just say that I really want to meet the boards that have no women in 2018. Like, what are you people thinking? Right? So, I mean, it's incredible. So the guy at DocuSign started by saying they won a prize because they had 2 women on the board. I mean, that shows that we have a long way to go, right?
I guess I'll take a slightly more cynical view and just say I think a lot of boards approach being public companies without women today. So I think people are actually going to struggle to comply. I actually haven't looked into the details of like what this means for companies, but I'm not actually like a strong proponent of this kind of regulation in general, because I agree that like if people start electing board members that are women that they don't actually trust the advice and counsel of, then we're gonna have a different problem, right? And so I think like solving it's a nice signal from the legislature. I think there are deeper issues.
Yeah, I think I feel both ways. Like I feel like we want women to have a voice. If you just put a woman there because it's a placeholder, I think it loses that depth. I think we need to grow the culture. Like, you guys are in a really cool spot. Like, I wish I was at a company when it first started, because then I can actually build the team correctly, build the boards correctly. So having organizations that help build companies at the forefront that are giving that diversity, right? Where I'm at, I'm always hired at very huge mega organizations, and already you have issues. And so make sure that we have board members that really can add a well-balanced, smart counsel, and that is really what we're looking for, and not just because it's another box that gets checks, because then I feel like we lose some credibility for women when we do that. And it kind of just becomes, oh, well, they're just they're figurehead. And we don't want that at all.
So I want to switch gears a little bit to women in leadership and women in product. And I think I've seen a lot of studies show that entry-level tech jobs actually have a good amount of women. It's about 30 to 40%. However, when it comes to leadership roles, those numbers drop a lot. Why do you guys think that is?
Well, I think there's been this big push for women in technology and STEM and schooling, and I think we are seeing women being excited and pushed in these directions. And so you can see that my numbers of software development engineers when I was just doing industry was just enormously increasing every year, because my pipelines were a very diverse representation of the population that I was recruiting in. So I kind of have this belief of not quotas, but I want to have my pipeline to look like the people that are in this community, diverse-wise. So, but at the leadership level, it's really a whole other ballgame. And you see these amazing, smart, capable, diverse candidates that they were held back. They didn't get to be manager of managers. And if you're not a manager of managers, you won't even be considered for many organizations like Amazon or Google. You have had to have at least managed 5 people on how to team of anywhere from 20 to 60 individual contributors. Well, most women aren't given those. So then they take another lateral role, then they take another lateral role, or even a completely different job family. So that's that zigzag that I was talking about. And that's where we really see, I am trying to figure out, sort of one by one, trying to figure out some more metrics of how to solve this problem and really create almost new combined job families and give opportunities in that way. And then I'm trying to speak on as many, in any other communities like AWIP, where we really start teaching each other. Like, hey, especially other leaders that are here, and it's like, okay, let's figure out how we can actually think about this, bringing in maybe these leaders that are really on the cusp, and consider them. And they have all of these other great skills that aren't in the traditional male-viewed what a manager looks like. So I think that's the other thing, is that we also have to step back and look like, what is a diverse manager? They add value in all these ways that we haven't actually ever had in a lot of companies before. And are we willing to step back and get a little uncomfortable and look at these kinds of leaders? And they are going to bring amazing things to the table. It's just not going to be what we're used to or what we've done in the past.
2 things I'd add to that. The sort of higher up the ranks in companies you go, the more the weight of history is on you, right? It's not, so first I'll put a stake in the ground and be like, it's not a meritocracy, right? Everybody gets to build a career based on the opportunities and the privilege that's been given to them. And if you're recruiting for somebody who is an EVP of sales, who's had a certain career trajectory, the number of people who have had the opportunity to rise to that level over the last 15 years of their career is smaller if you're looking at diverse candidates, right? And so I'd say that's a challenge, and so you need to look for candidates differently or give people chances if you do want to recruit more diverse candidates at that at that level of leadership. I guess the other thing I'd say about women in leadership roles, sort of overall, is just that I think if you look at the composition of an executive team and how they relate to one another, the most robust executive teams that I have seen, they don't all agree with one another. They weren't all friends with each other. They have differing points of view because like the moment of death for a startup is you're running, unless you're an incredibly efficient company, you're running on like a 2-year cycle of like get profitable or raise more money, right? And so any decision you make is life and death, and so like you're always trying to like tack toward the right course of action, and you need a differing set of point of views in the executive team to make sure that somebody is willing to like point to the signals that you're going in the wrong direction, right? And so I think like one reason that like campaigning for leadership earlier in a company that is diverse is that you're more likely to recognize when things go wrong, right? And like obviously there's an entire field of like, I guess, you know, organizational design research on groupthink, but I'd say like thinking very tactically from the startup point of view, like it's easier to get right in terms of leadership earlier that is diverse, and it's actually important to. I don't have a good set of like answers for, you know, what we as an industry should be doing to better improve this here.
Yeah, there's one thing that I heard a lot at Cisco that I want to take a little bit that you repeated, and I want to take exception to, because I think it's the core of what we need to change, which is hiring a woman is a little bit of a risk, right? Hiring me is a little bit of a risk. Hiring women is no more of a risk, right? In fact, frequently it's less of a risk, right? Because you have, again, because of the historic problem, you have much more qualified people who are much more ready for leadership who aren't getting opportunity, right? And I think we have to really put the stake in the ground that the world has changed and that we have to have open doors, right? And I can tell you, I was at a board meeting once, again, one of the more embarrassing things I'd ever seen in my life, where a set of male, older board members started to describe a set of founders as they. You know how they are, right? And I couldn't believe it. I almost fell out of my chair. I was trying to do everything I could to say, like, you know, this is ridiculous. But I think that still perpetuates so much of how we think. We look at people and we make assumptions, tribal assumptions based on gender, based on color, based on ethnic origin, and all that stuff has to go, right? Because it doesn't tell you anything. It tells you absolutely nothing about the character of the person. And I don't like organizations that think that way, and I think that it's part of what we have to change. And I think the reality is, some days I'm happy. I think when you sit through this conference, you can't help but be optimistic, right? When you see what's going on, when I hear Jayshree talk, and I just think this is great, right? But then I read the numbers and I read the statistics, and I think we gotta really change, right? That something went wrong in engineering school, right? Or something went wrong somewhere along the way. And so to me, I think this is like core and fundamental, and it's something that it has to be in the DNA of the founding team, and it can't be seen as, oh, we're going to take a risk, right? Because it's not, and it's stupid if we think that way. And I was part of an organization that thought that way for a long time, and I was ineffective at conveying. In fact, one woman told me something which I thought was brilliant, right? It was, we were struggling in the promotion committee. Please never get on a promotion committee in a big company. It's like thankless, okay? And we were struggling with this one person and the whole take a risk thing, and I'm banging my head against the table. And so we finally said yes. And one of the women in the room said to me, we have finally reached a point of equality here. Like, how so? Because look at all these incompetent men that got promoted. Finally, we promoted an incompetent woman. And I was like, this is what I'm part of. Congratulations, I'm really spending my time well. Yeah, funny and sadly true.
I'm gonna just take like 20 seconds to do a commercial then. So in thinking about like how to make change at big companies as well, I mentioned this company Clio, and Clio is a benefit that like HR or the CFO or part of that organization in a big company, and it's mostly big company customers. They buy it, and they call it the modern village. It's a support network of like text and telehealth and in-person people to help you when you have a kid, right? And so in the Bay Area, you have your first child as a woman at a median age of 33. If you think about where you are in your career at 33, a lot of people are like just hitting their stride, right? They're like really focused on their careers. They're like a manager. Maybe they're going to be a manager of managers. And like, if you just think about among companies who, current issues aside, have been held up as sort of the standard for caring a lot about diversity and culture and supporting their employees really well. At Google, 40% of women don't go back to work after having a kid. I will say, like, women supported by both parents and non-traditional parents get supported by Clio, but women supported by Clio, I'm trying to think about if the company's okay with me publicly saying like what the numbers are. A magnitude more women go back to work, and like it's a technology-enabled service, right? Like we're not doing anything magic. We're just filling a hole that structurally exists in the American like healthcare cultural like support system of this is very hard. If anybody's had a kid, it's a big deal, right? And so I think like creating workplace cultures that enable people to be successful through that actually matters, because if you take a whole bunch of people, it's a very mainstream thing to have a kid as well. So like most Americans will have a child while in the workforce, right? And so if you take out a whole bunch of people in their late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, when they're mid-career and they don't go back to work and they would have been leaders, like that's a systemic issue. And so I guess like that's I think like they're an increasing, I think on the sort of encouraging side, like there are an increasing number of organizations that recognize that as a structural issue. And if your company doesn't, have them take a look at Clio.
I had a follow-up to bias. So we all have biases. And there was this sociology experiment that was done with little kids, and it had them pick, first it was about color, skin color, and it picked little dark-skinned girls, big kids, boys and girls, and light-skinned. And they all picked the white dolls as the smarter, prettier dolls. But they also did it with gender. And they picked, both men, boy and girls picked that the boy doll was the smarter doll, was the more attractive doll. We are still using that lens when we are recruiting and we are leaders. When I have my diverse loops, all have very nice amount of women on my loops and unrepresented minorities on the loops. And what's interesting is they are the most critical of other women, and they are most critical of other people with darker skin or whatever minority group that we're looking at. And we as leaders, I make all my interviewers go through monthly bias check-ins. Because I have to admit, if I watch a movie that there is a character that looks like a certain woman, or a certain skin color, a certain nationality, all of a sudden is filtering through my head. And we all have that, all of us. And we have to really keep that in check, and especially if we're leaders, we need to make sure that when we bring in candidates, are we viewing it through what filter are we viewing it through? And if we don't do that, like this is the unspoken stuff that we're not really, we kind of talk about bias, but we're not really enforcing how do we keep bias in check. And that is where we're...
People don't know how.
Right.
Well, because we're
Like,
scared.
unconscious bias, I mean, and we've done this at Greylock, but like people are not sure this stuff works. And
Because you have to be willing to have an actual conversation about it, and that's uncomfortable to say, I saw a movie and now I feel a little bit more scared of someone who looks like this, right? But I'm not gonna say that to anybody because I don't wanna be bad, but we're thinking these things. And we're thinking, like I sometimes catch myself that I see a male and a female candidate and I still think the male candidate might be better. And I think to myself, why? Why did I think that? Because it's so automatic pilot. So we just need to start as the leaders. There's some really strong leaders here that I feel like is our responsibility. And I'm one of those people who brings this to, at every meeting I go to, people are sick of me talking about it, but now people are making those changes and adjustments.
One more on that, just to say the other thing is it's no longer just about what we see here in America, right? In most companies now, we're global right away. So we have North Indians versus South Indians. We have Chinese versus whoever, right? You have a whole set of things that you don't even aware of that sit there. But the reality is we have to train to say that we have a single expectation of ethics and behavior, and we have to be, it has to be core. If it's not core, we're never going to build great companies. Right? We have to do this.
And it's the bottom line.
too much.
The bottom line is the money. If you're working in global markets, you need to explain. Like, I think where I feel the backlash is, like, well, is it really diverse? Isn't it discrimination against, let's say, light-skinned people? But the bottom line is if we have to diverse representation so that we're providing our products and services to our demographics, to our customer base. Are we representing them properly? We aren't if we don't have diverse representation. And I think if we are, as leaders, explaining that to our interview teams, and we're explaining that as we build out our companies, I think that act kind of can check the bias conversation. Anyway, I think we may have overdone that.
Yes. We killed that question. We killed that question.
Lots of talk on bias. So we also talked a lot about recruiting for leaders, but on the flip side of the coin, are there any tips or advice you would give to aspiring leaders who want to advance?
Let me start with one thing, which is one company I can't name. I was actually privy to the salary survey they did, okay? And it turned out that they had a gender pay gap, okay? And they were very sincere, like, how did we get this? And they actually went and did the work to figure out how they got it. And what they found was, I think, instrumental to the same question, which was that some of the women and underrepresented folks had under-negotiated early, and that it compounded over time. And so if you went to the company and you said, okay, I'll take 120, and they're cool, right? They never said, well, you really should be asking for 130, right? And this built up, and it was significant, right? The longer this built up. The same thing here, which is, my personal belief is start early in thinking like you're a leader, right? Do not start by saying, I'm here and I'm different, I'm here, no one looks like me, I'm here and I can't, right? It's the thing that, look, I heard this once, think like a stupid white guy, right? Which is me, right? Why aren't I in charge, right? Well, you don't know anything, Dan. But still, I should be in charge. I think everyone will be much better off. But teach that level of ambition and teach it to your teammates. Preach it and say it's okay. There's nothing wrong with aiming here, because again, you're still going to end up somewhere grand. So.
I think this is also like sort of very mainstream view of like the differences between how men and women handle their careers. But to echo, I would say ask, right? So I'll give you 2 data points. Like ask for opportunities and ask for help for yourself as a more diverse candidate, and if you're an ally, support and encourage people to do this because it's not natural. I'll give you one example about myself. Actually, I guess they're both about me, but on like 2 different ends. So I get emails all the time from enterprising young people from lots of different backgrounds being like, I want to be in VC. And I'm like, cool, like, I also want to be in VC and I need to be good at being in VC, so I'm going to do my day job and actually give people an opportunity of like, being in VC is looking for companies and having a point of view and then supporting those companies. Like, you can do a lot of that without actually sitting in my role. If you do it and show me, I'll get on the phone with you, no questions asked, right? If you just have an opinion and go look for something. But I would say, like, let's say hundreds of people do this, and 90% plus of them are men, right? I actually don't believe that 90% plus of the people interested in venture someday in the future are men, but like that's just what I get in my email traffic. Then if like you apply the filter of like my like auto response, that's like, why don't you tell me about 2 companies that you really like? First of all, like almost nobody does it, which is ridiculous because I'm like, you took the time to write me an email about like getting coffee. Like, if you want to do VC, and then email me. But then like the people who, like I actually keep track of it, and like the people who come back with like, this is my opinion, are also skewed male of the people who, do respond. And so I'm just like, hey, that's weird, right? Like, why is, of the people that reach out, of the people who have an opinion of like why they should do this, it is very skewed, even for me on the receiving end. And then because I don't know if they'd be comfortable with me sharing this. So I, like many other VCs, occasionally blog. I find it clarifying to like try to write about what I think about, something that startups do or a sector or whatever. And I had an editor of like a large publication email me and they're like, why don't you ever ask me to publish anything? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't realize that was a thing, or like, should I ask you? And they're like, yes. And they shared with me that 90% of like what they got in terms of like, will you promote this? Will you publish it in your paper or whatever, was from male writers. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting, because I bet like not 90% of the people who have opinions in prose form are male. And so I just think that there is, like, in general, a sort of difference in comfort with self-promotion. Even among people where I'm like, I don't generally consider myself like a very shy person, right? And I'm not afraid to have an opinion, but I was like, oh, it just never occurred to me that like you did that, or that I should like go try to get my point of view on something blasted out in that way. And so I would say just like on everything where you would have second guessed yourself in terms of asking for a promotion, for an opportunity, for visibility, like probably try skew a little bit the other way. And I was really appreciative to that editor for like suggesting I did that, because that person was a guy. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I feel much more comfortable doing it now that you suggested it. Yeah.
I think she brings up a really good point of women lead with what they're not good at. It's one of the things, I talk with the top women from all over the world, like Google and Apple and Amazon, and they will still lead with what they're not good at. They'll have, we've all heard that 10 bullet points in a job description, a man can do 5 of them and he will say he's the best and will apply. A woman can look at the same job description and she can do 8 or 9 of them, and she might not apply because she still can't do that one, and then she's gonna lead in the conversation if she does apply with the thing that she can't do. And that scares me at the level, like, okay, I really understood it when it was software developers or just sort of more junior people in their career, like, that made sense to me. But to be at this level and to still see this, I still have to coach my leadership candidates. Please, we need to talk about how you're presenting yourself. You're not presenting yourself as an actual leader. You are doing badass stuff and you're not presenting that. So I coach my candidates, and I have this problem as well, just like she was talking about, right? Like, I get nominated for awards, I'm on TV shows, I get to do all kinds of cool stuff, and I don't sometimes lead with that, right? I run 3 or 4 businesses, but I can nobody wants to talk about AWS. Like, I get about 1,000 emails a day of, hey, can you get me a job? You're like the first person to ask me that. But, are you smart about how you ask me? And I don't respond to any of those. But if you have an engaging conversation and you looked my charity up and you donated to my charity, I will call you back, right? If you engage in a relationship with me, and part of what I realized was, I started thinking about like, well, a man would do this differently. And so I started thinking about some of the leaders that I had seen, the CEOs that I had supported and built their leadership teams with. They're on the golf course making decisions. And they usually were light-skinned, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna pretend I'm that person. Instead of thinking that I'm like scared and I don't have the education that everybody else around me has, I'm gonna think that I'm that guy on the golf course, and I'm gonna make that decision. And I have negotiated one of the top recruiting salaries of anybody on my team. I've negotiated the kinds of roles that I want. I work 100% from home. I get to work from Uganda. I get to do whatever I want because I negotiate like I'm on that golf course. I don't like golf. I'm never gonna go on a golf course. It's never gonna happen. But I'm negotiating, and it's like I feel myself, and so I try to actually tell my candidates, think about somebody that you can visualize that you know that they would make that decision, that they would know how to do it, and pretend that you were that person and answer your questions with that. And my candidates tend to do much better through the process if I coach them through that kind of process. And so I think for each of you, if this is something you're trying to think through, is like, how can I actually be my best advocate for myself, and how do I really think through that? And I constantly have to challenge myself in my own career of how to do that better and how to get myself on more, things to promote my charity and those kinds of things, because I too get like, oh, I only built 1 clinic, I haven't built, the 250 that I'm supposed to. Like, I still think in my French, like, you're the only person I know who has a clinic, so shut up, right? It's like, it's just that everything's not enough. I'm never enough. But what's interesting, this is my last point with this, is that I find that especially women, we look at things in these multiple markets, multiple like sectors, And that's actually where our secret sauce is, if we utilize that and if we can communicate that is actually what will make us a good leader. So take those soft skills and figure out ways to communicate them in a very tangible way. And that is what I've started to do, is that I just say I'm a CEO and I'm a leader and I do this and I do that. And people are like, oh, it's so great you do that. And I'm like, God, I feel like I'm kind of lying, but you somehow believe it when I say it. So, okay, I'm gonna go for it, right? So that's my entertainment background. I just realized you get on stage, you just do it, and you see what happens. Like the fact that you guys put me on this panel, seriously, I mean, it worked.
Just do it. I love that. Thanks for the advice. I'm going to open it up to any questions from the audience.
So this one's for Siobhan. Just some background to understand where I'm coming from. I worked at Amazon for 2 years. My career is defined before and after Amazon. If I knew what I was going to get into before I did it, I'd still do it again. But my last 6 months at Amazon, I was so bored. I was teaching myself Python because I was a woman. I got boxed out. I know other women who've had to leave. You talked about all these things to improve the pipeline, but they have so many women inside. And once you're inside, you don't build your resume because then your boss might try and get rid of you because they think you're looking for a job. So you have all these people with all these skills who bounced around. I had to bounce around. I had to get out because they so underpaid me. They so underleveraged me. But you have, and if you can make those changes at Amazon, it would be huge. Are there things that you can do that you think that you're doing externally that you could bring inside? Or have you tried to do that and it failed?
There's a lot of questions there. So my experience at Amazon has been awesome, except for one team I had. You know, and I'm not really, honestly, I'm not allowed to speak publicly about Amazon because I'm still there.
You speak about a large web hosting company.
Right. But what I can say is that, you know, you put a bunch of humans together and there's drama, there's politics. And I feel like if you do any research on me, you're gonna find this whole other thing about me. Like I stand up, I am a PTSD survivor, I speak about it, I talked about the Me Too movement way before anybody else did. So I have this very big life that's outside of that. And I'm also very sensitive and emotional, and I have all of these pieces that don't fit into a corporate job at all. So I've been on a couple mean girl teams, and what I had to do, one of the things, the biggest learning lessons out of that, and then I also coach other people inside and Amazon and outside Amazon, is go find somebody that you have a connection with and who has a chance to give you a job, and find a way to get that, and whether it's in the company that you're currently at or in another company. But like Amazon's one of those companies, there's like 200 companies within one company. You could move around the company. And once I'm in a different division, it's like I'm in a completely different job, in a different company, and these people, and I've had to switch around when managers change because they don't have the same emotional intelligence that I have to survive under being a Me Too person. So I move, and I have to constantly adapt, and I think these are those other things that we have to think about that's not really this, which is interesting. I'm excited the Me Too stuff is talking about because, you know, I have to consider who my boss is, because I will say things that I'm not, you know, that you're not supposed to say to a boss. Like, I'm sorry you're being sexually inappropriate and you need to stop now. That's, you know, probably gonna mean I've lost a job or two because of that. I have. So I need to make sure I'm in environments where I've already surveyed the situation. And this is another place where we have to be responsible for our career. So if you were in that situation and you come to me, I would say, okay, let's look at this. Where's your skill sets? Okay, let's find this. Oh, I bet, well, let's go find this. Let's go find all the different teams that you could go and work on and build that out. Or Amazon's not the fit for you anymore. Let's go find you a place that I know contacts for this. So use your contacts, use your relationships in and out of your jobs to see, okay, this isn't working for me anymore. I need to figure out what will.
And I've done all of those. I guess what I was trying to get at is those things that you're talking about. You're able to get them to do it for new candidates. How do you get the cultures to do that for?
They're working on it. I think all companies are trying to figure that out, but there was 10,000 people when I started, there's 500,000, 550,000. You're talking about a city that I work.
Oh, I know.
So one of my very best friends was sitting in a meeting, and she was listening to a set of managers describe what they were looking for. And she had every single criteria, and she came into my office afterward and said, this company sucks. I hate this company. I'm sitting in a room, they're talking about me. And I was like, okay, I buy that. But I'm gonna go back and put, did you raise your hand? Did you go forward? Did you go do this, right? Or did you self-limit and say, well, if I raise my hand, they might fire me, da 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 da, right? And so I partially say, you are responsible for your career, right? There is no Amazon. Amazon doesn't exist, right? It is a set of people who are self-interested. But you have to be responsible for saying, okay, I'm in this situation, it's either not gonna work or work, and if it's gonna work, then I'm gonna push, and if it's not, I gotta go somewhere else, right? And getting stuck is not good, right? Because all we got is time, and the time problem with getting stuck is really bad.
What are your thoughts about educating women around kind of looking out for themselves and kind of finding their core travelers, right? Because it's an interesting, we put a lot of responsibility and leadership as diversity metrics. But if you, for example, I went to business school, right? And it wasn't that long ago. And I took a women in leadership class, and the professor said, well, women get penalized if people find out they have children. So a lot of women should like hide that they have children. This is nonsense. I have 2 kids, right? When I go and interview with the CEO, all of them are men, right? Once we hit it off, I tell him that I have kids. And I'm waiting for his reaction. Because if I'm gonna go and must ask, right, every single day for that person, I need to know that if they don't see me as less valuable, right? But most women will try to apologize for the fact. I don't apologize for their mother, right? My job is my second priority after my children. That's really hard, right? Because there's a lot of other things that I want to do. And so educating women to look out and say, look, the world doesn't have to be that way. You're interviewing a company, you're interviewing a person, you're interviewing a potential manager, whether they will be your advocate. And if they don't, it doesn't have to be that way. We can find others.
Don't give them your vote.
Yeah.
Your body is your vote.
I agree with that. I also think that it's very hard to go out and educate every woman on that. Like I think business school is a great place to do it.
Well, apparently mine didn't.
Yeah.
Apparently yours did not. It's challenging because like we learn about the research about the bias that is out there, and then go forth and navigate the world knowing that's true. But I think like at least with the view I have to take is somewhat like I'm in a position of certain influence for the leaders that I work with, and like they're gonna hear it from me if I think that they have that attitude, right? Because I am not apologetic about being a mother myself, and like that is most women of over childbearing age in the United States, right? So then you got a real issue if you can't work with those people, and that's the way I present the issue. But I'd say like I'd be open to hearing ideas on how you think that education can happen, because I think from all sides in terms of actually talking to like your community and other women about who the leaders are that you actually want to work for, and then setting a new standard that's unacceptable is like probably the sort of highest leverage way I can think of to do it, because I do think new standards in the court of public opinion are pretty powerful, right? Like quotas, like we can argue about whether or not they work, but like sometime in the last year and a half, like the venture community decided that it's like kind of awkward if you have a team of 15 investment professionals and they're all old white guys.
Some are middle-aged white guys.
Oh, I'm sorry. Middle to old white guys. Right. No, but I just think for me and my friends that are female investors, like I think people would highly object to being GPs, being investors, if they thought they were there to be the token woman.
Yeah.
But they're very happy to see that the baseline of what is acceptable in the court of public opinion has changed. And so I think that is like, it should be unacceptable to be like, you're a mom, I'm not sure if you can really do this.
And teaching women is not okay. And for me, it actually helped the male mentors.
Yep.
Because they just, they don't have that legacy, they don't have the biases. They're like, yeah, you're ready for this, right? Don't look at one thing you don't have in your resume. Look at the 9, and this is how you approach it. In some ways, coaching and then adopting it my own way.
One thing that I think, and I can go on with funny stories of the Cisco Women's Network for ages, because we there was a lot of things that were totally, I mean, it was constantly put a guy up there to talk about mother, wife, daughter, right? Which was really a brilliant strategy. But I think one thing is these women's networks should be honest, and they should talk about the real issues, right? And constantly they vector into safe issues, and I think they should not vector into safe issues, right? Mentorship is cool, but if you have a problem with culture, let's deal with it, right? And be honest. And I think if you don't have a CEO who can take that, right, why are you at that company, right? I mean, I believe that. There's so much choice right now.
I want to ask a question about the Google walkouts. And especially, maybe this is unfair to you, Sarah, but to put you on the spot a little bit, in terms of, because Greylock has a lot of very big investments and a couple of very prominent GPs. One of the demands of the Google employees was to release women from their NDAs and end forced arbitration and non-disclosure agreements for gender harassment and discrimination. Would Greylock be willing to ask all of its portfolio companies to adopt that policy as well, both going forward and retroactively?
We're ending on a light.
We don't actually know how big the problem is, because all the women in the valley have not all, but many women in this room, I'm sure, have NDAs, so they will never be able to talk. We don't even know how big the problem is. And the only way to actually get those metrics is to have investors and powerful people, like, for example, Reid Hoffman, come out and say all of our portfolio companies need to release women from their NDAs immediately.
I think, thank you for asking the question. I think it's a legitimate topic to discuss. In general, the point of view of Greylock has been like, we're gonna invest in people that we think meet our bar for integrity and behavior and judgment, because we can't legislate, we can't tell people about every detail of how they should run their company and how they should behave, and that will never scale, right? So we need to trust people's judgment, and our portfolio is very small, so we're just choosing a group of 40 people in any fund to make decisions about. Then we, across the portfolio, do a series of things that try to create structural support for that. So I think one is support from both the organization and from both Greylock and individuals at Greylock for a company called Callisto, which allows for
but more broadly, right?
Yeah.
So there's a systemic problem, right, with the NDAs and the forced arbitrations in tech specifically, and the Google lockout address.
Yeah, so for my sins, I was general counsel at Cisco for a while. Let me take
There's going to be a lot more.
No.
Like 1,000 times.
No. Here's the issue. The macro level, you're right? The reality is that we should not have NDAs. We should not do this. The micro level is when you're involved with the people, frequently both sides don't want it released at the time. And obviously, one side, because they've done something wrong, the other side says, well, this will hurt my career, right? And so I also am not really thrilled about the idea that if it's not private, that one side who then has leverage can say, without the consent of the other, we're releasing this, right?
To release women from their NDAs.
Right, but releasing women and releases means, quite frankly, you're not signing an NDA. There is no one-sided NDA. You're not signing an NDA, which means both sides now can drop the bomb. Now, what I want to make sure that happens is that that it ends up in a better situation, right? The reality is I'll tell you what I really think is that boards have to stand up ultimately and say no, right? And I mean, this thing is so infuriating that I don't know Andy Rubin, I can't say, but let's assume that some percentage is true, right, of what they've said, right? How could that board have said, this is a really smart decision for us, right? I don't care if Andy Rubin competes at that point. I would say, so what I worry more about is how do we make boards think bigger, and all of this is going to help, right? Again, mercifully, I pray, like at places like Arista and Zoom, I'm never gonna end up in that problem, right? But I hope that when that does, if it ever happens, right, that I'm gonna say, as I say here today, that, you know, we are not going to do that, right? We do not pay off creeps, right? And that's, boom. But I would say on the general rule, it's really hard because, I mean, there was a couple cases that I knew of where I really didn't feel right about the whole situation. I thought the company didn't do well, didn't fire the person it should have, blah, 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 blah. But the person most wanting the confidentiality was the victim, right? And we just have to be honest that sometimes the victims aren't ready, and we want them to be able to do what they want to do and have their piece and be able to go do that on their time scale. So, but anyway, yes.
I just want to make a comment about that. What I would have liked to have heard you guys say is, that's a good idea, let's figure it out. Let's figure out how, because that's what we need you to say right now is, she's talking about trying to get in there and change a culture. It has to come, it comes from everybody, but you're in positions where you can really influence that. You know,
Yeah,
so
fair,
it's-
very fair.
yeah.
I think we are still in a culture where we blame the victim. And that is across the board. And unless people in power, unless we as a community and as a culture put pressure on these boards and these leaders for consequences, both financial and powerful consequences, there won't be change. And it isn't safe for the victims to be public. You know,
So the point is that releasing them from their NDAs means they can speak. They are no longer under the gag order for the rest of their lives. So if they are ready, they can come forward.
What else is the
And we
company?
can actually start to get actual data about how deeply ingrained this problem really is. Because that's the problem right now. One of the problems.
When we start canceling the NDAs, the companies could well say, to protect ourselves, we're going to release some of this information. Right? It's better to have it out now when we control it.
And I worry about that, right? And I just say, look, it is a good idea. We have to. I'm black cat, white cat. Let's eat mice. Like, let's fix the bloody problem, right? I just want to make sure that this solution is the one that fixes the problem. The one that I know has to change is the way that boards look at these settlements has to change, right? And it's just, it can be embarrassing. If we were to put those discussions out into public view, we would all be embarrassed at what gets said, right? And that culture has to
Yeah,
change.
but one of the reasons why it never gets to the board level is because of the binding arbitration agreements.
No, this will,
Because the
Andy
numbers
Rubin,
are much lower.
Andy Rubin got to the board.
Okay,
Andy Rubin
yes,
was
but
at the
many
board.
others don't.
These do-
Many others don't.
Right,
Because they're
the
in
CEO
hundreds of
hides them.
thousands, if not tens of millions.
Yes, and the CEO hides all this crap
Right,
from the board,
exactly.
right? And it says, oh,
Right.
blame the victim, right?
All right, we have time for
One more question.
one.
And on an easy one, please.
No, but I think these are very definitely important topics, especially in this climate. So it's good that while we have folks represented from different industries and positions where we can affect real change, right? And that's the reason why, you know, Advancing Women Product and groups like us exist, to give voices to these concerns. So with that, last question.
We spoke a little bit about how women and leadership, you know, how it gets a little thinner. We touched on motherhood. What do you think about age? I think we do talk about diversity, and I think, yes, it's beyond sexuality and gender. Diversity comes in background and bringing your whole self. And I mean, I took some break, you know, when I had my child, and I loved it in all ways. But is this something that you see? You know, I'm the kind of person who wants to see open doors and not roadblocks. But it is interesting. I'm happy, for example, you know, I see many people who have not worked at AWS, right? You don't have the stamp, or we did go to other business schools and not necessarily to Stanford. And it comes into the meritocracy. Like, I don't know, just a question, you know. Do you think that experience and age are also a diversity factor that we should look at?
So I bet my business on this, right? I believe that founders over 35 have value, and I've invested in founders who are over 35, and what I have found has been less founder drama, more maturity around business, better diversity, none of for the craft. And so I believe that age may even be as big a problem as other issues like this issue, and that like this, it represents an enormous opportunity, that there's money to be made there. And, but, you know, the myth of the 24-year-old founder continues to cause problems.
It hasn't been my experience at Greylock. I mean, we have a few very young founders, which I think of them as the wonderful wonder kids that like are doing really well. But like the age range of the founders I work with of my boards right now is like early 30s to mid 50s. And so I'd say, I definitely think that there is a sort of a cultural bias against people that are older in entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley. But you know, I just think it's a different approach from every investor. And I have founders that are first-time founders with very little experience in what they're trying to do, and I have founders who are on their third startup that have built enterprise software companies before, and they all face different challenges, right? And so we're just looking for people who can succeed, and they can succeed in different ways.
I have my own personal issues around this, right? But I think, you know, old school way of doing it was, I have 20 years, I have 30 years experience in blah, blah, blah. So I'm not thinking from their perspective, I'm thinking as a recruiter. As soon as you put that, you've now stamped some sort of age or some sort of thought process on first your screener, which is your recruiter, who, God bless, most recruiters are not, they're kind of like a dog who's looking for a colored ball, right? They just want something that they're looking for and whatever that is. And then the next, if they make it to that, they get to the hiring manager who also has a colored ball that they're looking for. If you start putting your ages in there and how many years you've been in this, instead of just putting your experience. So that's kind of my way to get around the ageism, but I do see it. You know, like people with gray hair definitely don't make it through the interviewing process as easy at any company I've ever worked at in the last 15 years. I think we have kind of gotten into this very, especially in the Bay Area, God bless us, but like, you know, if you're under 30, you're an entrepreneur. If you're over 30, I don't know, it's something different, right? But we can be our own voice for that. And so I feel like we still have to usher ourselves and our careers and those in our flock to really make sure we're communicating what value we add. And it isn't about years of experience, it's about the actual value that we add. And so I think if we take the years of experience and the age, like I always say 10 plus. It's a lot longer than 10 plus. But I don't want anybody to know how many years that is. You can figure, if you look at my resume, you can probably figure it out, right? But I just give it a little bit of credibility, but I don't put that as my focal point. I put the focal point of what I've changed, how much revenue I've driven, how much I've changed an organization, how much I've changed a community. You know, I think those are the things that in any role, whether it's an early leader or if you're going towards the CEO, you need to show where you've added value. And if you focus from that versus the ageism, you know, the age piece, I think you can start to have more control over the ageism issues that are out there that we can't control, because you are going to get older.
And I would just add one thing is I'm very careful about the, like, not that I don't like intrinsically make them, but I'm very careful about the assumptions I have about other people based on their age, their gender, their background, or whatever else. Because I think that's the way it becomes dangerous, right? That's the way that bias gets introduced, is people assume like, oh, are they really gonna have the energy to do this if they're like 60 or whatever, right? And a way that I reflect on it is, personally, I'm like, see, 4 weeks after having my kid as a new mom, I'm like pretty damn sure I worked a lot harder than a lot of VCs in Silicon Valley. And so I think just like reminding yourself and your teams either that you can abstract it and make sure that people, you know, they don't have as many opportunities to make the assumption about you. Or just know that like you want the teams you work with to like explicitly call out that those assumptions can be made and say you're not going to do that, right?
This is personal to me because when I left Cisco, I thought I wanted to be Sarah. And I went to talk to some of my closest friends in the VC community, not Greylock, but a couple different firms. and I got the message of you're old and stupid. And I decided I was going to fight that point. I said I'm old or stupid, not old. And I quickly realized that either I could repeat this comedy show, which only one side was laughing, which is never good, or I was going to have to prove something myself. And I basically said, I can't, this has to change. And I'm going to be some small voice somewhere in the wilderness for change, right? And I live every day with this, you're not old and stupid. And that's my first message when I meet teams. Because they kind of sort of go, everyone looks at us, we think we're old and stupid, but we're really not. And I'm like, you're like me, you're old or stupid, right? Welcome to my world, right? So I think we, it's part of what I view, I have to lead, be part of leading this change, and we have to be better at this.
Very humble words from a guy who sits on the board of Zoom, Arista, and SentinelOne, among others. But I just want to say thank you so much for the panel. And I know we talked about a lot of top of mind topics tonight. So hopefully you guys will also stay for the networking mixer. But I also want to invite up the director of our ambassadors program.
Gifts first.
Yeah. So all right.